In the chaotic aftermath of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, when the city lay in ruins and the air was thick with the smoke of 1,000 fires, a group of society matrons emerged as angels of mercy. They called themselves the Golden Gate Benevolent Sisterhood, and their mission was to rescue the thousands of children left orphaned, lost, or abandoned amidst the devastation. But buried in sealed city archives is a far darker story, one of a journalist who got too close to the truth and paid the ultimate price. The Sisterhood didn't just rescue orphans, they harvested them. This is the story of how San Francisco's most respected women orchestrated one of the most sinister human trafficking rings in American history, using the chaos of a national tragedy to build an empire on stolen innocence. What they did with the children they saved is a secret the city's elite have guarded for over a century, a secret we are about to reveal. Before the Great Shake, San Francisco was a city of exquisite contradictions, a jewel of the Pacific built on gold rush grit and robber baron greed. Nob Hill mansions, opulent monuments to unimaginable wealth, looked down upon the teeming, squalid streets of the Barbary Coast. It was a city of opera houses and opium dens, of unbridled progress and profound corruption. Then, at 5:12 a.m., on April 18, 1906, the world came apart. For less than a minute, the earth buckled and roared, toppling the proud facades of banks and brothels alike. The fires that followed were the true apocalypse. Fed by ruptured gas lines and fanned by bay winds, the inferno raged for 3 days, consuming over 25,000 buildings and reducing the heart of the city to a smoldering, skeletal ruin. In the aftermath, amidst the stench of scorched redwood and death, a new and terrible kind of desperation settled over the survivors. Martial law was declared. Soldiers with fixed bayonets patrolled the rubble, ordered to shoot looters on sight. In the sprawling tent cities that sprang up in Golden Gate Park, thousands huddled together, their lives reduced to a shared trauma and a desperate search for lost loved ones. The most heart-wrenching figures in this tableau of misery were the children. An estimated 5,000 of them were left orphaned or hopelessly separated from their families. They were the silent, shell-shocked witnesses to the end of their world, wandering through the ruins with grimy faces and vacant eyes. It was into this tableau of despair that the Golden Gate Benevolent Sisterhood made its grand entrance. They seemed a vision of order and grace in a world gone mad. Their leader, Beatrice Sterling, the 45-year-old widow of a shipping magnate, moved through the refugee camps with an aura of unshakable command. Her wealth was legendary, but it was her reputation for philanthropy that made her an untouchable figure. She was tall, regally composed, her silver-streaked hair pinned in a perfect chignon, her tailored clothing somehow resisting the grime that coated everyone else. Her pale blue eyes, famous in society columns for their compassionate gaze, now surveyed the devastation with a chillingly practical focus. At her side were her indispensable lieutenants. Eleanor Vance, the severe 50-year-old wife of a federal judge, was the iron hand in the velvet glove. She was the organizer, the administrator, a woman who could conjure order from chaos with a sharp command and an unwavering stare. And then there was Isabel Croft, younger, widowed by a banking heir, whose breathtaking beauty and disarming charm were her primary weapons. She could soothe a hysterical mother, calm a suspicious army captain, or coax a story from a traumatized child with equal, effortless grace. Together they projected an image of perfect, selfless charity. Within days they had commandeered a partially standing warehouse south of the scorched Market Street district, using their connections and a hefty cash donation to secure it from the military. They named it the Orphan's Respite, and it quickly became a symbol of hope. Thomas Reed, a 35-year-old journalist for the San Francisco Chronicle, was assigned to cover their story. Reed was a cynic by trade, a man who had spent years documenting the city's corrupt politicians and violent tongs, and he was initially skeptical of such ostentatious displays of charity. But what he saw at the respite moved him. He witnessed the Sisterhood's volunteers, all respectable ladies from the city's finest families, tenderly bathing soot-caked toddlers and spoon-feeding warm soup to hollow-eyed children. He saw Beatrice Sterling herself, kneeling on a dirty floor to comfort a crying infant, her expression a perfect mask of maternal love. "We are simply doing God's work, Mr. Reed," she told him, her voice a low, cultured melody that cut through the surrounding din. "These children are the future of our great city. We must see them to safety, to new lives where they can forget this horror." The Sisterhood's plan was as ambitious as it was inspiring. They would house the children temporarily, using a sophisticated system of documentation to record every detail of their lives. Then they would place them on specially chartered orphan trains bound for the heartland. There, they claimed, thoroughly vetted and loving Christian families in Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas were eagerly waiting to provide them with new homes. The city, overwhelmed and desperate, hailed the plan as a miracle. Donations poured in, and the military government gladly ceded responsibility for the thousands of young refugees to these capable, well-funded women. Reed's first articles were glowing tributes, painting the Sisterhood as saviors and Beatrice Sterling as a living saint. His stories were syndicated nationally, turning the Sisterhood into symbols of San Francisco's resilience. Yet, even as he wrote his praise-filled columns, a sliver of professional doubt remained. It was the atmosphere inside the respite. The order was too absolute, the children's obedience too uniform. It was the unnatural silence of the place that first unsettled him, a quiet that felt less like the peace of a sanctuary and more like the chilling suppression of a prison. Before we delve deeper into the chilling secrets of the Golden Gate Benevolent Sisterhood, I need to ask for your support. This channel is a community for those who aren't afraid to look into the abyss of history. If you're one of them, prove it by hitting that subscribe button and joining our quest for the truth. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. Now, let's return to San Francisco, where a journalist's keen eye began to see the cracks in a saintly facade. A week later, flush with the success of his initial articles, Thomas Reed's editor assigned him a follow-up, a feature on the departure of the very first orphan train. It was meant to be the triumphant capstone to his series, a story of hope and renewal. Reed arrived at the warehouse with a photographer in tow, expecting to document tearful goodbyes and nervous, excited smiles. Instead, the scene that greeted him solidified his nascent unease into genuine, cold suspicion. The children, several dozen of them, were lined up in the main hall. They were freshly scrubbed and dressed in new, identical sets of plain, durable clothing. But they were not being treated like children about to embark on a great adventure. They were being processed. Beatrice Sterling and Eleanor Vance moved down the lines with clipboards, their movements crisp and efficient. Reed watched, his journalistic instincts on high alert, as Vance stopped in front of a sturdy-looking boy of about 12. With an impersonal touch, she opened his mouth and examined his teeth. She then had him flex his arm, feeling the muscle with the practiced air of a rancher assessing cattle. "This one is strong," Vance noted to Sterling, making a mark on her clipboard. "Grade A, suitable for agricultural placement." The phrase, so detached and clinical, sent a chill down Reed's spine. It was the language of commerce, not compassion. He saw Isabel Croft moving through the lines of younger children, her beautiful face a mask of sweet concern. She would pat ahead here, straighten a collar there, but her eyes were constantly scanning, assessing. He saw her make a subtle mark on the file of a particularly pretty girl of about 11. Reed tried to interview some of the children, kneeling to ask a small red-haired boy his name. The boy opened his mouth to speak, but before a word could escape, Isabel Croft materialized at his side, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. "The poor dears are still so traumatized, Mr. Reed," she cooed, her hand resting gently but firmly on the boy's shoulder. "We find it's best not to overwhelm them with questions. It can set back their recovery." The deflection was masterful, a perfect blend of professional concern and polite dismissal. But Reed saw the flash of terror in the little boy's eyes before he was silently led away. The documentation process was equally unsettling. Each child was given a numbered tag to hang from their neck. Reed managed to get a closer look at one of the files left momentarily unattended on a desk. The child's name and age were listed, followed by a series of cryptic codes: Comp high, Compliance high, Phys B+, Physique B+, Edu low, Education low. It looked less like an adoption file and more like a bill of lading for human cargo. The defining moment of the day, the one that would shatter the last vestiges of his belief in the Sisterhood's mission, arrived in the form of a gleaming black motor car. It was one of the few still functioning in the city, a symbol of immense wealth and power. A man in an expensive tailored suit emerged. Arthur Hemlock, a notorious industrialist, a silver baron from Nevada whose reputation for ruthlessness was as vast as his fortune. Hemlock was known for his brutal, unregulated mining operations, where safety was an afterthought and workers were treated as expendable. Reed watched from a discreet distance as Beatrice Sterling greeted Hemlock, not with the deference one might show a generous benefactor, but with the crisp handshake of a business partner. They spoke in low, clipped tones, their heads close together. Sterling gestured towards a line of older, stronger-looking boys who had been separated from the main group. An envelope, thick with what could only be a large sum of cash, passed from Hemlock's hand to Sterling's. It was a swift, almost invisible transaction, performed with the practiced ease of two people who had done this many times before. Hemlock then walked down the line of separated boys, his gaze analytical and possessive. He pointed to three of the sturdiest. "Those ones," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Have them ready for my transport in an hour." Minutes later, those three boys were taken not to the waiting train cars, but to a separate, guarded room. Their new life, it seemed, was not in a loving Iowa farmhouse, but deep within the suffocating darkness of a Nevada silver mine. Reed, his hands trembling slightly, signaled to his photographer. "Get the car. Get Hemlock and Sterling together. Don't be obvious." The photographer, sensing the gravity of the moment, discreetly captured the exchange. The resulting photograph, grainy and taken from a distance, would become the first piece of hard evidence in an investigation that would ultimately cost Reed everything he had. Reed returned to the Chronicle offices, the acrid smell of the city's ashes seeming to cling to his clothes, a physical manifestation of the moral decay he had just witnessed. The image of the cash-filled envelope and the condemned boys was burned into his mind. This wasn't charity. It was a sophisticated marketplace for human flesh. He locked himself in his small office and, fueled by coffee and a cold fury, wrote a new article. This one was sharp, accusatory, and detailed. He described the clinical inspections, the coded files, and the blatant cash transaction with Arthur Hemlock, a man whose name was a byword for labor exploitation. He laid out the facts, letting them speak for themselves, creating a narrative that was impossible to misinterpret. He slapped the finished draft on the desk of his editor, a harried man named McGregor, who was already fraying under the immense pressure to print only positive, uplifting stories to bolster the city's morale and attract reconstruction investments. McGregor read the first two paragraphs, his face paling. He read the rest, his expression turning to one of abject terror. He threw the papers back at Reed as if they were contaminated. "Are you insane, Reed?" he hissed, his voice a low, panicked whisper. You're not just questioning a charity, you're accusing Beatrice Sterling, the anointed saint of this city, of selling children to a ghoul like Hemlock. The men who own this paper play cards with her. They sit on boards with her. This story will not run. Not now, not ever. Find me irrefutable, undeniable proof, the kind that can stand up in a courtroom or find another damn job. The rejection was a gauntlet thrown, and Reed knew McGregor was right. Without concrete evidence, he was just a lone voice against the most powerful and beloved women in San Francisco. His word against theirs was no contest, so he would get the proof. He would build a case so airtight that not even the city's corrupt elite could ignore it. He decided to pursue the story on his own time, in the shadows, after his official workday was done. His first step was the paper trail. The Sisterhood, for all their power, still had to operate within the city's bureaucracy. He knew a low-level clerk at City Hall named Daniel O'Malley, a man with a perpetually worried face, a gambling problem, and a deep-seated resentment for the city's wealthy. Over a bottle of cheap whiskey in a smoky backroom saloon south of the ruins, Reed laid out his suspicions. He slid a $20 bill across the sticky table, a small fortune for O'Malley. "I need to see their official filings, Danny," Reed said. "Everything. The adoption manifests, the custody releases, the transport permits." O'Malley, his eyes darting nervously towards the door, licked his lips. The money was tempting, but the risk was immense. Beatrice Sterling had friends in every corner of the city, but his debts were more immense. He pocketed the bill. "Give me 2 nights," he whispered. "Don't come to my place. I'll leave a package for you at the newsstand on Kearney." 2 nights later, the package was there. Reed took it back to his cramped boarding-house room and spread the contents across his bed. At first glance, the documents were immaculate. The adoption manifests for the orphan trains were perfectly typed, listing the names of receiving families in small towns across the Midwest. The children's intake forms were detailed, their backstories tragic and plausible. But O'Malley, in his nervous scrawl on a scrap of paper, had pointed him in the right direction. "It's the signatures, Tom," the note read. "The release forms, the ones supposedly signed by distant relatives or city officials relinquishing custody. A lot of them are signed by the same justice of the peace, a man named Abernathy. Funny thing is, Judge Abernathy died in the quake. His body was one of the first pulled from the ruins of the old courthouse." Reed felt a jolt, a surge of grim triumph. It was the crack in the foundation he had been looking for. The documents were sophisticated forgeries. The entire paper trail was a lie, rubber-stamped by a dead man. Emboldened, he moved to the next step, the trains themselves. He spent another 10 precious dollars bribing a cynical railway dispatcher at the Oakland yards, a man whose loyalty was to the dollar, not the company. The dispatcher, after checking his logbooks, confirmed Reed's darkest suspicions. The train designated GGBS Angel's flight number. One had indeed departed as scheduled, but it had never headed east. An hour out of the city at a remote switching station, it had been diverted onto a private, unmarked spur line, a line owned exclusively by Arthur Hemlock's Nevada Consolidated Mining Company. Its true destination was a remote, brutal mining camp deep in the Nevada desert, a place the workers grimly called Purgatory Flat. The children weren't being sent to loving homes. They were being shipped like raw materials to a place from which few ever returned. Reed knew he had to follow. He had to see it with his own eyes, no matter the cost. The journey to Purgatory Flat was a descent into a different kind of American hell. The civilized world fell away with each mile, replaced by the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the Great Basin. After a rattling, all-night train ride to Reno, a city teeming with speculators and gamblers, Reed hired a horse and a guide. The guide, a grizzled old prospector named Jedediah, spat tobacco juice into the dust when Reed told him his destination. Purgatory Flat? Jedediah grumbled, his eyes narrowing. Ain't no place for a newspaper man. That's Hemlock's private kingdom. He's got guards meaner than rattlesnakes, and he don't like questions. He's got what business you got there? Reed fed him a well-rehearsed lie, claiming to be a fiction writer gathering material on the Silver Boom. The story was flimsy, but Jedediah, pocketing Reed's cash, shrugged. Your funeral, friend. As they rode deeper into the Nevada desert, the landscape became a blasted alien world of slag heaps and alkali flats. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of crushed ore and the faint, acrid smell of dynamite that seemed to cling to the very rocks. Purgatory Flat was not a town, it was a wound upon the earth. A collection of ramshackle bunkhouses, a massively overpriced company store, and a grimy saloon all huddled under the constant, deafening roar of the stamp mill, a monstrous machine that crushed ore day and night. The entire camp was fenced with barbed wire and patrolled by armed guards, grim-faced men with rifles who watched every newcomer with open hostility. Reed left Jedediah and the horses at a safe distance and made his way into the camp on foot, his press credentials hidden, posing as a drifter looking for work. The sights within the camp were a catalogue of human misery. Men with hollow eyes and lungs thick with rock dust shuffled through the dirt streets, their bodies bent and broken by the relentless labor. But it was the children who stopped his heart. He saw them everywhere. Small boys, some looking no older than 10, their faces smudged with grime, hauling heavy buckets of rock from the mine adits. They worked in the sorting sheds, their small, nimble fingers picking valuable ore from the crushed rock, a task that filled the air with a fine, deadly dust. He saw young girls, barely teenagers, working in the camp's laundry and cookhouse, their faces etched with a weariness that had no place on a child. They moved with a listless, mechanical quality, their spirits seemingly as crushed as the ore in the stamp mill. He spent 2 agonizing days in the camp, his stomach churning with a mixture of rage and horror, carefully documenting what he saw in a small, concealed notebook. He learned from a drunken Cornish miner in the saloon that the children were called Hemlock's foundlings, or more cruelly, the Quake Rats. They had been brought in after the disaster in San Francisco, presented as orphans whom the benevolent Mr. Hemlock was giving a chance at a productive life. In reality, they were a captive labor force. They worked 14-hour days, were fed barely enough to survive, and were housed in a single, overcrowded bunkhouse under the constant watch of a particularly sadistic guard. They were, in every sense but the legal term, slaves. On the second afternoon, he saw a face he recognized. It was a young boy named Leo, whose photograph he had taken at the Orphan's Respite. In San Francisco, the boy had been bright-eyed and smiling, his new clothes clean. Now his face was gaunt, his eyes were vacant, and he limped heavily, dragging one leg behind him. The leg was clearly broken and had been improperly set, a permanent injury he would carry for the rest of his short life. Reed risked everything to speak with him, cornering the boy for a fleeting moment behind the company store as Leo was hauling a sack of potatoes. "Leo," he whispered urgently, showing him the photograph. "Do you remember me? From the big house in San Francisco?" The boy stared at the image of his former self, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, quickly extinguished by a wave of fear. "We ain't supposed to talk about 4, he muttered, his gaze darting around nervously. "They told us we was forgotten, that Mrs. Sterling, the angel lady, she saved us for a life of purpose." The phrase, "a life of purpose," was so grotesquely twisted, so clearly a brainwashed mantra, that Reed felt a wave of nausea. He pressed the boy for more information, learning that 2 other trains, 2 more shipments of foundlings, had arrived since his own. They tell us we're paying back our debt to Mr. Hemlock for his kindness, Leo whispered, his voice cracking. They say we work till the debt is paid. A debt, Reed knew, that would never be paid. Before they could talk further, one of the camp's guards, a hulking man with a scarred face, spotted them. "You got business with the boy, mister," the guard snarled, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Reed, feigning drunkenness, mumbled an apology and staggered away, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He had his confirmation. He had the forged documents, the railway logs, the photographs, and now a first-hand account from a stolen child. The Golden Gate Benevolent Sisterhood wasn't just a fraud. It was an industrial-scale trafficking operation, a vital supplier to the voracious, human-devouring engines of American industry. Just when we thought we'd seen the worst of humanity's greed, the labyrinth of the Sisterhood's crimes grows darker and more complex. If this descent into the Gilded Age's hidden horrors is making your blood run cold, it means you understand the stakes. Share this video with a friend who appreciates the gravity of true historical mysteries, and hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe, because the secrets we're about to unearth will shake the very foundations of San Francisco's history. Reed returned to San Francisco a different man. The cynical journalist was gone, burned away in the desolate heat of the Nevada desert. In his place was someone possessed by a cold, righteous fury. The haunted eyes of Leo and the other children of Purgatory Flat had become his personal ghosts. This was no longer just a story to be written. It was a crusade to be won. He knew that exposing a single mining camp, however horrific, wasn't enough. Hemlock was just one customer, a single head of a monstrous hydra. To bring down the entire operation, he needed to understand its full, sprawling scope. He needed to know who else was buying children from Beatrice Sterling. He needed the Sisterhood's master ledger, the real one, the one that tracked the profits and losses of their trafficking empire. He sought out O'Malley again, this time in a fog-drenched alley near the docks. The proposal was far more dangerous and the price tag far higher. Reed laid out $100 in cash on a damp wooden crate, a life-changing sum for the perpetually indebted clerk. "I need to get inside the warehouse, Danny," Reed said, his voice low and intense. "Just for an hour, after dark." O'Malley stared at the money, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was terrified. Getting caught inside the respite meant more than just losing his job. The Sisterhood's private guards were not known for their gentleness, but the lure of the cash, the dream of a life free from loan sharks and threats, was too strong. "1 hour, Tom," he finally whispered, snatching the money. "The East Side delivery door, midnight Thursday. I'll make sure the patrol is on the far side of the building, but after that you're on your own." And we never spoke. Under the cover of a moonless, fog-choked night, Reed slipped through the side door O'Malley had left unlocked. The warehouse was an eerie, silent tomb. The rows of cots, holding sleeping children, looked like tiny graves in the gloom. The air was heavy with the institutional scent of disinfectant, boiled cabbage, and unspoken sorrow. Following O'Malley's whispered directions, Reed made his way to Eleanor Vance's office on the second floor. The door was locked, a new, more formidable one than the one he'd heard about. But Reed had come prepared, having spent 2 days learning the rudiments of lockpicking from a retired cat burglar he knew from his crime beat days. With trembling hands and a piece of bent wire, he worked the lock. After a few tense, heart-stopping minutes, he heard a faint click. The office was as organized and severe as the woman herself. Files were stacked in perfect, alphabetical order. But on the desk, separate from the official paperwork, lay a large, heavy, leather-bound ledger. It was not the pristine, official-looking document he had seen before. This one was worn at the edges, its pages filled with dense, coded script. It was the real record, the ledger of souls. Reed worked feverishly by the light of a small, shielded candle, his camera ready. The ledger was a masterpiece of cold-blooded accounting, a horrifying chronicle of a business built on human lives. Each page represented a shipment or a private placement. Children were not listed by name, but by an alphanumeric code, SF-M-10-H-B, San Francisco, male, age 10, health B. Next to each code was a destination and a price, ranging from $50 for a grade C laborer to $500 for a grade A, high compliance girl for domestic service. He saw Purgatory Flat listed multiple times, but there were other destinations that made his blood freeze. A textile mill in the Carolinas, notorious for its brutal child labor practices. A remote cattle ranch in the Arizona Territory, belonging to a wealthy baron with a known reputation for sadistic cruelty. And then there were the private placements. His hands shook as he photographed the entries. SF F12HA, pretty, suitable for domestic service. Delivered to Mr. A, prominent judge's name. Personal residence. SFM09HA, fair-haired, compliant. Delivered to Mr. A state senator's name. For his wardship. The Sisterhood wasn't just supplying labor to industry. They were a bespoke service, catering to the private, depraved tastes of the city's most powerful and respected men. They were selling children into domestic servitude, and likely far worse, to the very people who wrote the laws and sat on the benches. Reed photographed page after page, the soft click of his camera's shutter sounding like gunshots in the silent room. This was a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of power in San Francisco and across the nation. As he was carefully packing up his camera, he heard a sound that made his blood turn to ice. Soft, deliberate footsteps in the hallway, approaching the office. He snuffed out his candle and froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The doorknob turned slowly. Reed crouched in the suffocating darkness of the office, every muscle tensed. The footsteps stopped just inside the door. A match scraped against a box, the sound deafening in the silence. A small flame flickered to life, illuminating the serene, composed face of Beatrice Sterling. She stood there, holding a lit candle in a silver holder, her expression not one of surprise or alarm, but of cold, quiet assessment. She had known he was there. She had been waiting for him. "I had a feeling you were a man who couldn't leave well enough alone, Mr. Reed," she said. Her voice was utterly transformed. Gone was the warm, cultured melody she used for the public. This voice was flat, hard, and devoid of any emotion save a faint, chilling amusement. She closed the office door behind her, the soft click of the latch sounding as final as a coffin lid shutting. "O'Malley is a weak, greedy man. $100 buys his service for an hour. $200 buys his silence and his information for a lifetime." The blood drained from Reed's face. He had walked into a meticulously prepared trap. He slowly rose to his feet, the heavy ledger in his satchel feeling like a tombstone. "It's over, Mrs. Sterling," he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I have everything." The forged documents from City Hall, the real train routes, the photographs from Hemlock's slave camp, and now this ledger of souls. He patted the satchel. Sterling's gaze flickered to the bag, and for the first time Reed saw a sliver of genuine emotion in her eyes. Not fear, but a flash of proprietary anger, as if he had desecrated something sacred. She took a step closer, the candlelight casting long, dancing shadows that made her face a shifting mask of light and darkness. "You see this as a crime, Mr. Reed," she said, her tone almost conversational, as if they were two academics debating a point of philosophy. "I see it as an act of profound civic hygiene, an exercise in necessary order." "Order?" Reed scoffed, his disbelief giving him a surge of courage. "You call selling children into slavery order? You call feeding them to monsters like Hemlock hygiene?" I call it practicality, she retorted, her voice sharpening with an edge of steel. This city was drowning in its own refuse, Mr. Reed, human and otherwise. We were faced with thousands of destitute, uneducated, and potentially criminal mouths to feed. They would have grown into a generation of thieves, prostitutes, and anarchists, a burden on the decent people who are trying to rebuild our glorious city from the ashes. What did we do? We performed a miracle of social alchemy. We turned a liability into an asset. She gestured with her free hand towards the sleeping children in the warehouse beyond the door. These children are given a life of purpose. They are contributing to the great industrial engines that are making this country powerful. Mr. Hemlock's mines are not a slave camp. They are the furnace of progress, fueling the nation's expansion. The textile mills in the South clothe our citizens. We are building a stronger, more efficient America. Her self-righteousness was absolute. Her logic a terrifying, perverted reflection of the era's most ruthless social Darwinist principles. She genuinely believed she was a hero, a visionary social engineer cleaning up the messy, inconvenient byproducts of a disaster. She was a monster who saw herself as a patriot. And what about the ones you sell to men like Judge Thorne? Reed pressed, his voice dripping with contempt, naming one of the most respected jurists in the state. What great purpose does a girl serve in his private home? Beatrice Sterling's lips curved into a faint, chilling smile. It was the most terrifying expression Reed had ever seen. Every great man has needs, Mr. Reed, appetites. To lead, to build, to judge. It requires immense energy. The Sisterhood provides a service. We ensure that the men who run this country are satisfied, content, unburdened by distraction. We maintain the social order from the top down and the bottom up. We are the silent, unacknowledged architects of this new San Francisco, this new America. You cannot stop it. You can only choose whether to profit from it or be crushed by it. She took another step, setting her candle down carefully on the edge of the desk. From the folds of her elegant dress, she produced a small, silver-plated derringer. The pistol looked like a toy in her hand, but Reed knew it was deadly. I am offering you a choice, a business proposition. Your silence has a price. Name it. $1,000? 5? Or you can become another tragic victim of the lawlessness that plagues our broken city. A looter, perhaps, shot while resisting arrest. The small silver derringer in Beatrice Sterling's hand gleamed in the candlelight, a delicate feminine object designed for a single deadly purpose. Reed looked from the pistol to the cold, unyielding certainty in her eyes, and knew that any plea for mercy, any appeal to a shared humanity, would be utterly useless. She wasn't offering him a choice between wealth and integrity. She was offering him a choice in the narrative of his own death. He could die a rich man, his silence bought and his reputation intact, or he could die a poor one, his name smeared but his soul, perhaps, clean. There isn't enough money in this city to buy my silence, Reed said, his voice a low, defiant growl. He clutched the satchel containing his notes and the precious photographic plates. This was his only shield, his only remaining leverage. This ledger, my notes, the photographs, they're not just with me. Copies are safe, with a colleague. If I disappear, the story gets published. Everything comes out. The whole world will know what you are. It was a bluff, but a desperate, half-true one. He had given a packet of his initial notes and a few of the less damning photos to his colleague, Henry Shaw, with instructions to publish if he didn't check in within 48 hours. But the most explosive evidence, the plates from Purgatory Flat and the ledger, was in this room with him. Sterling's chilling smile tightened at the corners. A good reporter always has a contingency, she acknowledged, her voice laced with grudging respect. But you vastly underestimate our reach, Mr. Reed. The Chronicle's board of directors includes two of our most generous clients. Your editor, Mr. McGregor, is a man who values his mortgage above all else. Your story would be buried before the ink was dry. Your trusted colleague would be summarily fired for attempting to print libelous filth. And you, Mr. Reed, would be posthumously discredited. We would find witnesses to testify to your drunkenness, your debts, your blackmail schemes. No, your only power is in your own life. She raised the pistol slightly, her aim steady. In your own life. And that is a very fragile, very temporary thing indeed. The standoff stretched for a few heartbeats, a silent battle of wills in the flickering candlelight. It was broken by a sudden noise from the main hall, a child's soft cry, quickly and sharply shushed. The sound seemed to snap Reed out of his paralysis. He wasn't just fighting for a story or for his own life. He was fighting for the hundreds of silent, terrified children sleeping just a few feet away, and the thousands more who would follow them if he failed. In a single, explosive motion, he acted. He didn't go for the gun. He did the one thing she wouldn't expect. He hurled the satchel, his life's work, not at her, but at the tall, ornate bookcase against the far wall. The bag struck with a crash, sending books tumbling to the floor. As Sterling instinctively flinched at the noise, Reed lunged for the desk, grabbed the heavy burning candle holder, and flung it at the room's single grimy window. Glass shattered. The sudden influx of cold, foggy air extinguished the candle, plunging the room into absolute darkness. He heard Sterling's enraged shout, "Guards!" Component placement followed by the sharp crack of the derringer. The bullet whizzed past his ear in the dark, splintering the wooden frame of the office door. He didn't wait for a second shot. He crashed out of the office and ran, stumbling blindly through the cavernous, dark warehouse. He could hear the children stirring in their cots, whimpering in fear. Behind him, he heard Sterling's furious voice directing her men. He burst out of the side entrance and into the foggy, labyrinthine streets of post-quake San Francisco. The city, his city, was now a treacherous landscape of rubble-strewn alleys and the skeletal, burnt-out hulks of buildings. It was a perfect hunting ground. Reed ran, his lungs burning, his only thought to get back to his boarding house, where he had a more complete set of evidence hidden. He could hear footsteps pounding on the pavement behind him, more than one set. Sterling's private guards. He ducked into a narrow, reeking alley between a collapsed hotel and a condemned tenement, the stench of stagnant water and decay filling his nostrils. He pressed himself into the deepest shadows, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He waited, listening, trying to control his ragged breathing. For a moment there was only the sound of the foghorns on the bay and the distant clang of a work crew clearing rubble from the tracks. Then a shadow fell across the alley entrance. Then another. They had him cornered. Two large men, dressed in rough work clothes but moving with the disciplined purpose of hired thugs, blocked the only exit. One of them held a length of lead pipe, swinging it gently in his hand. The lady was very clear, Mr. Reed, the first man said, his voice a low growl. She wants her property back, and she wants to be sure you won't be writing any more stories. Reed's hand instinctively went to his coat pocket, where he kept his notebook. "I don't know what you're talking about," he gasped. The second man smiled, a cruel, humorless expression that revealed a row of yellowed teeth. "Don't matter. The instructions are the same either way." They advanced on him slowly, their figures looming like malevolent giants in the fog. Reed knew this was the end. His final thought was not of himself, but of Henry Shaw, hoping against hope that his friend would have the courage to publish what little he had. The lead pipe rose and fell. The fog muffled the sound. The official police report the next day would state that Thomas Reed, a journalist of some local renown, had been the tragic victim of a botched robbery in a dangerous part of the city. His death would be a footnote in the grand, triumphant story of San Francisco's rebirth. Thomas Reed was dead, but his story was not. Henry Shaw, his young, idealistic colleague, received the news of Reed's robbery with a knot of ice in his stomach. He waited for the 48-hour deadline Reed had set. When it passed with no word, Shaw knew his friend had been murdered. He opened the package Reed had left him. It contained the initial notes, the photo of Hemlock and Sterling, and a frantic, scribbled letter from Reed detailing his plans to get the ledger and urging Shaw to publish everything if he didn't return. Shaw, terrified but resolute, knew that taking the story to McGregor at the Chronicle would be a death sentence for the truth. He bypassed his editor, his newspaper, and the entire mainstream press, which he now understood was controlled by the very men he needed to expose. He took the evidence to a small independent printer in the Mission District, a man known for publishing anarchist pamphlets and labor union screeds, a man who feared the city's elite far less than he despised them. The story, published as a cheap, sensational pamphlet titled San Francisco's Lost Children, The Secret Sin of the Golden Gate Sisterhood, created a firestorm. It was sold on street corners, passed from hand to hand in saloons and working-class neighborhoods. While the city's major papers denounced it as scurrilous libel and sought to ignore it, the story spread, eventually reaching the ears of reform-minded politicians in Sacramento and even a few progressive federal officials in Washington who were looking for an excuse to crack down on the unchecked power of the Western robber barons. The public outcry, fueled by the grisly details in the pamphlet, became too loud to ignore. A federal investigation was launched, but it was a carefully managed spectacle from the start. By the time investigators raided the orphan's respite, it had been scrubbed clean. The children were gone, successfully placed with loving families, according to the Sisterhood's final, immaculate records. The incriminating ledger was never found. Beatrice Sterling, Eleanor Vance, and Isabel Croft were brought before a grand jury, where they performed their roles as aggrieved saints to perfection. Flanked by the city's most expensive lawyers, they portrayed themselves as victims of a malicious smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled alcoholic journalist. The powerful men whose names were in Reed's notes, judges, senators, industrialists, provided sworn affidavits testifying to the Sisterhood's impeccable character and charitable works. They painted Reed as a blackmailer who had tried to extort money from their noble organization. In the end, the official investigation concluded that the Golden Gate Benevolent Sisterhood had suffered from minor administrative irregularities and poor record-keeping, understandable lapses in the chaotic post-quake environment. No criminal charges were filed. The Sisterhood was quietly disbanded, its leaders fading back into the opulent privacy of their Nob Hill mansions, where they continued to be revered as pillars of the community. Arthur Hemlock's mining operation was fined $10,000 for minor labor law violations, a paltry sum that was, for him, simply the cost of doing business. The orphan trains were officially recorded as a successful and heartwarming chapter in the city's heroic recovery. Justice was not served, it was surgically excised from the official historical record. But the truth festered. For decades, the story of the stolen orphans was whispered in San Francisco's back alleys and saloons, a dark legend that the city's boosters tried to erase. The fates of the children sold to the mines, the mills, and the private homes of the powerful were lost to history. They were the uncounted casualties, their lives consumed by the industrial machine they were forced to serve. Most were never seen or heard from again, their names erased, their suffering unrecorded. The legacy of the Golden Gate Benevolent Sisterhood is a chilling testament to the capacity for systemic evil to flourish under the cloak of charity. Beatrice Sterling and her matrons had perfected a monstrous form of social engineering, turning a city's greatest tragedy into their most profitable enterprise. This mystery shows us that the most profound evil is often not the work of deranged monsters, but of rational, respectable people who convince themselves that their crimes are a form of progress. What do you think of this story? Do you believe justice was truly served, or did the powerful elite of San Francisco succeed in burying their sins forever? Leave your comment below. If you believe these hidden histories need to be told, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with someone who isn't afraid of the dark. Because the true story of America is often found not in the headlines, but in the secrets that were meant to be forgotten.